You're a Hoya now.
You're a Hoya.
Hey, man.
Well, he's a true Hoya.
What happened?
Él se graduó en algo.
Wait, they wanted to take a
Oh, that's
picture.
right. That's right.
Take a
Right,
picture
he's a
with it.
Hoya.
Double Hoya. Yeah.
I was going to do it later anyway, but they wanted to take a picture here with the Georgetown hat.
Yo le voy a dar unas palabras a John Carroll. Lo estoy tapando, pero luego John Carroll va a dar la... Okay, so when do we start? One minute, okay.
De lo de Carlos, porque al fin y al cabo yo con todos los panameños me llevo bien. Es como casa. Para mí Miami y Panamá es la misma cosa.
Así es. Acá sabes que se te aprecia muchísimo.
Igualmente, igualmente.
Mauricio, ¿las oficinas de ustedes están abiertas?
Sí, tenemos un pequeño grupo, ¿no? Los ejecutivos están viniendo, pero no, obviamente no todo el mundo. Pero ya el fondo para 1 de junio creo que han trazado, ya con las vacunas y eso, vamos a ir abriendo un poco más. Así que ya pronto, si Dios quiere, estamos tomando unos pasos hacia adelante. Pero yo estoy aquí. Yo he estado aquí desde el 1 de octubre, he estado todos los días y con un pequeño grupo hemos estado aquí resolviendo, pero hemos estado... Y bueno, fuimos a Barranquilla, ahora tuvimos la reunión anual en Barranquilla y fue semi-virtual, fuimos como 30 de aquí fuimos. Y la verdad es que fue la mejor decisión que habíamos tomado. La verdad es que fue muy productivo, muy bueno estar ahí.
Okay, I think we are gonna start. So welcome everyone to the webinar on rebuilding Latin America from the inside. The COVID-19 crisis has affected the world in unprecedented ways for more than 1 year, stretching thin the resources of both the public and private sectors and exposing the long-standing tensions and growing edges of political and economic models. All regions are going through great lasting transformations that affect everything from economic to humanitarian, social, and even political aspects. All the figures indicate that Latin America, as part of the global economy, has been even more affected. Even before the pandemic, the region was at its weakest point in decades. A question remains, is it possible to be optimistic about the new reality? That is why our first webinar for 2021 will be focused on the role of multilateral agencies in supporting Latin America with the private sector as we move ahead in the region. Mr. Mauricio Claver Caron, president of the IDB, will discuss the role of multilateral organizations after the crisis, about the future of US-Latin America relations, and the role of the government, multilateral organizations, and the private sector in supporting the competitiveness of the region and their recommendations for policymaking and international cooperation as we move forward to recover the region. We welcome as well some of our Latin American board members, Samuel Lewis, Manuel Balbontin, Alberto Beck, and Muni Jensen as moderator of this panel, who will also discuss their perspectives on how Latin America region, multilateral and private sector can foster future growth and inclusion in the Americas. Hopefully, the discussion will provide an optimistic perspective moving forward. Thanks to the leadership of the Latin American Board at Georgetown University, the Latin American Leadership Program has been working to create impact within the region. More than 700 young leaders are generating a multiplier effect in the region with their projects driving Latin American engagement, developing impact networks, and promoting transformational leadership. The LALP have had a strong relationship with the IDB through the years, and it is a must stop for all these young leaders. Today, we want to thank the IDB Lab, the Area of Innovation for Citizen Services, and the Visitors Program for all its collaboration with LALP. The IDB has been a key ally for the LALP, and we are very grateful for that. We will be collecting questions during the discussion, and we will address them if we have time. For those of you connected to the Zoom webinar, you can submit your questions using the Q&A section in Zoom. You can find the Q&A icon in the menu at the bottom of your screen. This event will also be recorded and the video will be posted to lalp.georgetown.edu after the event concludes. Welcome to all the people connected via Zoom and watching us live stream through our website. We welcome the Georgetown University community, the LALP Alumni Networks, GCL and ILG, Class Alumni Network, Latin American Board, LALP Advisory Committee, friends and colleagues. Without further ado, let me welcome our 4 amazing panelists. Thank you for taking the time from your busy schedules to be with us. Moni, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you everybody for joining us. We have a very good and growing turnout as the minutes go by. Thank you, Ricardo, especially for always keeping me close to Georgetown in the Latin American conversation. I think it's important, particularly urgent at this time. And as you read the speaker bios, you will see a very strong common thread among all speakers, which is a crossover between business, academia, and government, with a very strong backbone on social impact and endeavors. And everyone in this panel are all forward thinkers, trying to stay optimistic. This is what is needed for the region to recover and rebuild, both institutionally and toward the outside world. And it's also the spirit of the Georgetown Leadership Program. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Mauricio Claver, IDB President, thank you so much for joining us. You're also a Hoya and also a prime example of someone who has approached the region from several angles. The role of the IDB at this time is particularly urgent as we see a climate of crisis in Latin America. We would like to hear from you first to give us the big picture. The region is struggling, high inequality, social unrest, negative growth. What are the main challenges you see to achieving these goals, and how can multilateral organizations work with both government and business and academia, of course, to overcome these obstacles?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you so much, Muni, and thank you, Ricardo. Thank you for Georgetown for the invitation. I have my Georgetown hat with me here. My Hoya, I am a Hoya, and I'll always be a Hoya. I don't have it on because I'm losing my hair, and then when I take it off, you're gonna see then the architecture of how I kind of my 4 hairs cover my head. So I'm gonna avoid that embarrassment. But it's such a pleasure to be with you, and it feels like home. And thank you so much for the kind invitation. And I look forward to the day we can do this in person. And I could invite you here to the IDB and vice versa. So thank you so much. Let me set the big picture, right? I mean, we just had our annual meeting in Barranquilla a few weeks back, and one of the most daunting statistics is the fact that 2020 was the biggest contraction in Latin America and the Caribbean since 1821. So in 200 years. So that's pretty daunting. Think about some other numbers here. You know, you have 40 million people that have lost their full-time jobs, you know, with formal jobs that are so hard to have in the region. You have 45 million people that have likely fallen into poverty. You have over 50 million people that are going to fall out of the middle class, which has taken decades to build. So that's a pretty daunting scenario there. But I'm a defiant optimist, and that's what this is all about. So we have opportunities, and we're going to deal with these opportunities. And of course, first and foremost, we have to get past COVID. And here at the IDB, we have been really moving. And since I started October 1st, it has been literally sleepless nights trying to figure out how we can help the region first and foremost turn the page so we can move forward. Obviously, everything is about vaccines right now. In my first 100 days, we put $1 billion that we re-identified and relocated specifically to deal with vaccines. And we've been helping the countries in the regions, mostly through the COVAX facility, but also now we learned that one of the biggest issues that countries were having were in the bilateral negotiations with pharmaceuticals. So we created a task force with the pharmaceuticals, and a few weeks back, we launched a unique instrument which provides an indemnity guarantee. One of the issues that countries were having was in order to be able to have some of the really onerous indemnity clauses that the pharmaceuticals were asking for. So we're taking on risk here at the IDB, something that we're doing a lot more of and needing to do to be able to help countries. So we launched this mechanism, working with 3 countries right now to provide them this guarantee mechanism. We're the first and only international financial institution to be doing so, but also it's very necessary because this is the region that's been most disproportionately affected by COVID, with 8% of the world's population, but over 1/3 of the world's death. And by the way, add to to that, the world's worst migrant crisis with Venezuela, which obviously just has supersedes that of Syria's crisis at this point. And by the way, with the worst hurricane season in 50 years last year, where we had these hurricanes in Eta and Iota in Central America, which were devastating, and with 4 out of 5 countries in the world most affected by natural disasters. So this is a uniquely, and when I talk to like the heads of other multilaterals, and they tell us obviously the problems in Africa and in Southeast Asia, et cetera, I say, look, we are uniquely placed in regards to the challenges here on this front. But where are the opportunities? When we went to Barranquilla, I didn't want to be, and one of the things I ran on and I've really been practicing, and one of the things that we've really turned the page on here is that we don't want IDB to just be about diagnostics. We want it to be about solutions, and we want it to execute and do programs and really be at the forefront of innovation and these solutions. So what we set ourselves out is what in the 5 years of this presidency, what are the opportunities that exist so that the region will not have another lost decade? So we presented in Barranquilla to our board of governors what we called Vision 2025, and we called it Reinvest in the Americas, a decade of opportunity. So no lost decades. And in this, we prioritized 5 areas. And I know we're going to talk a lot more about these now, but let me just give you a quick overview. The first of which is integration and supply chains. And look, this whole concept of nearshoring is real. And for the first time ever, we just approved the business plan for IDB Invest this week, the board did. And for the first time ever, nearshoring and integration is part of that business plan and is part now of, is a line of business of IDB Invest. And we launched in Barranquilla a nearshoring toolkit. This is not me pushing nearshoring, the United States pushing nearshoring. This is happening. COVID was exhibit A of nearshoring. There was a great piece by Andres Oppenheimer recently about the Suez Canal. Suez Canal and the blockage was exhibit B of it. So from a health security perspective, from a transportation security perspective, all around the board, major companies are looking at nearshoring as a great opportunity. And in so doing, we launched the largest private sector partnership in the history of the IDB a few weeks back, in which we had 40 of the biggest companies in the world, mostly US companies, which essentially signed a pledge to increase their exposure and investments in the region. Everyone from Amazon to Walmart to JP Morgan to PIMCO was there. Some Japanese companies like Netcore, Bayer, pharmaceuticals throughout, because there is a real opportunity. You see it survey after survey, and it is our job to take advantage of that. And we're providing financial incentives to do so for companies that look to relocate. We're providing obviously technical assistance, and we're providing the countries that are doing the right things. I mean, there's some success stories. There's some countries that aren't taking advantage of the opportunities, and I'm not going to go into that, but there are countries that are doing the right things. You see Colombia, you see Costa Rica, you see Uruguay, you see Dominican Republic, you see countries that are really focused on trying to attract that investment. You see Panama, you see countries that are working really hard to attract that foreign investment, and we're helping them, whether it's with their investment promotion agencies, et cetera. And the biggest criticism I get from our non-regional shareholders is that, hey, the IDB is not supposed to be an investment promotion agency. And I tell them, you know what? It is. We're going to do so because nothing helps development more in the region than creating jobs. And it has an enormous development impact, and that's what we're going to be focused on. The next one is, number 2 is digital economy. Digitalization is real. You know, we've seen 3 things that have been forced through here: telemedicine, telework, and teleeducation. We need to expand those. You know, we had 250 million people in the region that are not connected to the internet. We need to increase that connectivity. You had 30 million kids that did not have access to schooling during COVID because they didn't have access. So it's not just about access, though, and in rural areas and the things we're focused on, but it's also about cost and quality. And we need to focus on that. And we're going to, and that's one of our areas of focus. Third is SMEs. Hey, look, we have huge opportunity with SMEs in the region, and there's huge gaps that need to be filled. First and foremost of which is women. The most successful entrepreneurs, small, medium-sized entrepreneurs in the region are women. A woman-owned small, medium-sized business in the region has 10% greater income than one owned by a man, but yet they have 50% less access to financing. Financing for SMEs is a priority, and it's priority for us in our line of business here at the bank. And by the way, one of the reasons why we named the highest ranking Latin American woman in the history of the bank, Reina Irene Mejia, as our executive vice president, who came as the CEO of Citibank, of Citigroup in Central America, because precisely this is a line of business that we need to focus on and a great opportunity. Along that line, number 4 is obviously gender, a line of business on gender. Nothing can have a greater impact on the economies of the region than including women in the workforce and access to financing. I mean, it would have a huge impact on GDP. It would increase GDP by 20% in the region. It's crazy. $1 trillion. $1 trillion. Let me repeat this. I'm not stuttering. $1 trillion. That's a lot of money, and that's a great opportunity. And 5th, climate. Look, climate change, it's not about And people say, oh, surprising, we've been leaders and we're being leaders on climate. Look, I'm from Miami. When I was born, Biscayne Bay was here, and now Biscayne Bay is here. And we're seeing all kinds of things that have been done. So this is very real to me, and it's very real to the region. Like I said, 4 out of the 5 countries most affected by climate are right here in the Caribbean and in Central America. We saw it with ETA and IOTA. We've now launched our first, and I'm very proud of this, our first climate fund ever here at the IDB, and it's called the Amazon Fund, and its focus is the only project, and I think, frankly, it's the most important climate financing project in the world today, where we already have $1 billion of commitment. We have buy-in from the 7 Amazon nations: Colombia, Brazil, Suriname, Guyana, Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru. And in that regards, we're already identifying projects in order to be able to help the bioeconomy of the Amazon in that regards. And I think that's going to be a game changer. We also launched that in Barranquilla. Anyway, I can rattle on and on, so just cut me off. I'll stop if you want another question, so I don't just chatter away.
Thank you, Mauricio. I think every one of our speakers has questions for you, so we'll try to address those as well as some questions from the audience in the end. I'm going to kick it off to Samuel Lewis. Samuel, thank you for joining us. And your career is also a testimony of this crossover between government and the private sector, Vice President of Panama, business leader, innovator. And since we're thinking out of the box, and Mauricio has provided a great kind of framework for this conversation, let's focus a little bit on the nearshoring opportunities for Latin America. The conversation has resurfaced. It really caught some traction after the Suez Canal crisis, as the Oppenheimer article stressed. But truly, what is needed from government, from business, from the community in different countries of Latin America for a lasting and not just an opportunistic realignment of the global supply chains? And how can Latin American countries that are smaller, not necessarily just Mexico, Colombia, et cetera, really turn this into a transformational trend? So Samuel, I'll leave it with you. And I know you have some questions for Mauricio, you can leave them for the end of your intervention.
Thank you, Muni. And thank you very much, Mauricio, for sharing that Vision 2025, which I think that is a clear way out of a crisis that we have never thought could get as deep as it has gotten. As Ricardo mentioned, the region was already in a downturn, if you can call it, in terms of growth when this COVID-19 pandemic hit. 23 out of the 33 countries in the region had a contraction in their GDP growth, and 14 of those countries already had a negative growth rate. Fiscal deficits were the norm, and all the governments were forced to shut down the countries, as you mentioned, highest levels of unemployment ever in history, situations that we had not seen in 200 years. So what we find ourselves a year later is every country finding tremendous challenges, not only the main challenge, which still is the healthcare and how to deal with the pandemic, rolling out vaccines, in which the bank has been critical support, but also with the worst financial situation in history in most of the countries. Every country has seen their GDP debt levels reach high levels not seen before. Every rating agency has really downgraded, if not all, most of the countries. And this puts a lot of pressure in governments facing social situations that were not foreseen. Poverty and extreme poverty continue to increase. And the banks, commercial banks in the region, as well as in the world, finding themselves also in a position of being cautious. Therefore, the responsibility of the multilaterals at this stage becomes much more important. In the world, and in our region in particular, the IDB, as you really pointed out with this list of 5 points, where I think you put together a very coherent way to deal with this. Now, having opportunities, as you mentioned, nearshoring, everything that has to do with the empowerment of women, everything that has to do with the digital society. requires that, on the other hand, be fertile ground for this. Let me ask you a couple of pointed questions. One of them is this a good opportunity for the multilaterals and the IDB in particular to promote long-awaited political reforms in the different countries, promoting governability, promoting good governance, promoting transparency, accountability, etc., as part of this new dynamic in terms of lending? Another question is, understanding that the IDB has been at the forefront of supporting the private sector through IDB Invest and now with the IDB Lab, how can this be promoted or structured in a way that gives the private sector much more access to funding at a time when, at the same time as the countries have faced financial challenges, the companies in several areas have found the same. Therefore, having much higher interest rates from the commercial banks and much bigger challenges to find those funds in order to be able to execute projects for which the private sector is much more agile and has a much better structure to deploy much quicker than even the governments. So I'll leave these two issues. You touched on them, but to continue talking about them after my colleagues go through their own process. Thank you, Uni.
Thank you. And Mauricio, I promise I took notes, and I will reframe the questions as soon as we hear from all of our speakers. I'd like to introduce Manuel Balbontin, the chairman of the Latin American board, who is a very active part of the conversation about a renewed role for the private sector as being not just accountable to its shareholders, but also the stakeholders in the community. And you mentioned women empowerment programs for minorities, et cetera. I would like to hear from Manuel in terms of business. The great thing about this panel is that there is so much experience, hands-on experience from the private sector. And it would be very interesting, Manuel, to listen to some of the examples that you have witnessed in empowerment, in business and government working together to impact the community as a source of stimulating economic activity. And then if you have some input about the role of governments that could guarantee steady environments for this type of business and government dynamic. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Moni, and thank you, Mauricio and Samuel and Alberto that's coming after me. Clearly, COVID-19 has been a devastating effect in the region. If we just put it in numbers, the world is going down around 4.5%, while Latin America suffered between 8 and 9% GDP contraction. This is the worst crisis we have had in a very, very, very long time. Unemployment has gone up between 20 and 40% in some countries, going from 8% to levels of around 12%. Some countries, specifically like Colombia, almost reaching 15%. So this is only worsening already an equal and poor countries. To give you an idea of the future, the region is expected to grow in 2021, but we do not expect to reach pre-pandemic levels till 2023. On the employment side, we don't expect to reach pre-pandemic levels until most probably 2024 or 2025. And in this situation, the public sector is faced with enormous restrictions because the high deficit that has been created everywhere after Brazil, Chile, Peru, as an example, have invested more than 10 to 15% of GDP. That makes it not only a very difficult situation in the region, but also debt has been increased in the region substantially to levels of almost 75% overall. Just to consolidate, forget about reducing the levels of debt, just to consolidate and stop this debt growth. Some countries like Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico has to reduce their expenditures by 3.5% to 4% per annum. So it's enormous. And therefore, I think the public sector has its hands very tight. They can help in many ways. Multilaterals will have to help, but the private sector will be key. The private sector in Latin America employs, depending on the country, between 85 to 93% of everybody that is employed. Investments by the private sectors. The private sector is very prone to continue investing. In general, the private sector is well capitalized. Banks are well capitalized in the region, and therefore that stability will allow them to help in this process. Private sector will will drive this innovation. There, the government has to make sure not to over-regulate, has to let and help this innovation to happen. Private sector is investment prone. I believe that the best way of creating jobs and growth is through investment, not through extra taxes. So I think governments will have to be careful on increasing the burden on these companies to just finance these deficits, because then growth it's affected. I believe, as it was mentioned before, the lead on automatization and digitalization and the technology, the way that technology is disrupting these big businesses, and these are smaller companies that suddenly come into this, will be done in many ways by the private sector. And as it was mentioned by Mauricio and Samuel before, nearshoring is critical, that Latin America can become a supplier of products, more developed, high value-added products to the world after everything has happened with COVID, plus the frictions there are between China and the US. So all that, I believe, is going to happen. And within that, I think it's very important two aspects. One, equality. We mentioned it before, not only in gender, social economic groups, origins, and environmental sustainability. And there I want to give you a personal experience. We are big investors in the region. We advise over $48 billion, and most of our investors are all focusing on how to make sure these socially responsible investments happen, either through private equity, private debt, public equities, public debt. We are signatories of the PRI, which is the Principle of Responsible Investment that is supported by the United Nations, by ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, which are very socially responsible rules. And most of our investors are asking to do that, and we will ask the corporations to do that. So I'm very optimistic in the sense that we are going to experience a private sector driven recovery. There is going to be a lot of innovation, and it's going to be much more equal and socially responsible. And I want to leave it there just for you to continue discussing.
Manuel, a very brief follow-up question. You're the chair of the Latin American board. What role do you see for academia in this puzzle?
Academia is key, not only in educating our next generation students, but we do a lot of research, disseminate best practices, best example. We share knowledge, not only with students, but with other academia, with corporations, with government institutions, with multilaterals. I think that role is crucial. Just to give you an example, at Georgetown, 1/4 of the professors of Georgetown have direct or indirect relationship with Latin America in different aspects that they are focusing at any time. We at the Latin American board are supporting, and through this newly created Georgetown American Institute, are supporting a lot of different aspects like fellowships and visiting professors that are analyzing success stories and how to replicate them. Through these programs of webinars, we can also try to make more knowledgeable the people about the opportunities and the good examples, etc. Through graduate and undergraduate continuous education programs like CLASS, Center for Latin American Studies, the Latin American Leadership Program, programs that are helping educate people at all levels, from government, from private sector, in terms of innovation, in terms of competitiveness, and also raising money to help some financial aid for students that come from the region that have all the academic capabilities, but they don't have the means. So I think we can play a huge role as part of this development and improvement of the region.
Thank you so much, Manuel. I will now turn over to Alberto Beck. And Manuel spoke about a private sector-driven recovery. However, the region is facing staggering unemployment at a time when job creation is one of the key engines for reactivation. And the COVID crisis has shed light not just on creating jobs, but creating different types of jobs, which obviously underscore the need for reforms in education and access to technology and development of new skills in science and innovation. What are some of the examples of the work that needs to be done, not just by governments, but by the private sector, together with multilaterals, of course, and academia, to stimulate this job creation that is so sorely needed?
Thank you, Moni. Mauricio, I have to start by telling you, it must be because you're a Hoya, that seldom do you get excited when you hear a presentation by the head of a multilateral organization, and hearing you is exciting. You're can-do, results-oriented, willing to take risk. And if you combine it with the quality of the people that you have at the IDB, you're going to have a killer organization. So very exciting to hear you. Very exciting to hear about your priorities as well. When you look at the priorities that you set out and that you discussed in Cartagena, or you presented in Cartagena, I think that putting aside SME, although SME is clearly one of them as well, not as strongly, but these are the mega trends that you're focusing on in the world, the growth-related trends. And it's also very exciting to hear that you're concentrating on those. The pandemic has been a crisis, is a crisis of health and jobs. And I want to talk about, especially on the job side and related to the priorities that you have set out, Mauricio. But briefly on health, you probably know him. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's one of the head of one of the largest healthcare institutes in the world, and the best in its kind, based in Miami. In the middle of a pandemic, he told me that COVID-19 was like the worst nuclear bomb that had exploded in the healthcare sector. Then he paused and he said to me, "It's the best, worst nuclear bomb that has exploded in the healthcare sector." And what he meant was that the COVID has accelerated a number of technologies, but more importantly, has accelerated the adoption of a lot of existing healthcare technologies in some cases by 5, 8, 10 years even. There is clearly an opportunity, especially you mentioned telehealth in your presentation. I think there's a huge opportunity for Latin America in terms of telehealth, because you can reach many more people, but also you can reach people with a better quality health. You can import quality healthcare from other countries that are more advanced in terms of health care technology. But on jobs, when I see the world, I see two trends in the world. On the one hand, you look at the physical world, and that is deglobalizing at a very fast pace. Through trade barriers, we've talked about nearshoring, through immigration barriers, people are looking inward. I mean, that's happening in the US, happening in India, happening in Europe with Brexit. But at the same time, you have the world globalizing at a very fast pace when you're looking at the online knowledge economy. And if you're looking at the future, clearly the world that is going to grow faster is the online world. And that is a challenge for Latin America because we have 250 million people in the region that are not connected. Those that are connected have very meager connectivity, with in some cases 1 megabytes per second to 2 megabytes. When we were talking about 5G, that should take us to 10 gigabytes. So 10 times, 15 times what the top 4G can give you. But related to connectivity, and you talked about that, the need to connect people in the region, I totally agree. I would also would like to mention, and I see it as an opportunity of collaboration between Georgetown and the IDB, it's data. How can we, people talk about data in the context of the new energy, the new electricity. To me, data is the new English. Before learning English, you need to learn data. And the good thing with data is that you can start at the basic level with basic skills and then develop those skills over time to data scientists, data coders, data analytics, and what have you. But what about coming up with very basic skills for the, I always think about the marketing to poor, where I think it was Unilever that came up with the sachet of shampoo rather than the bottle, so you can access more people to buying the shampoo. What is our basic data educational skill development that we can develop, and we can do it jointly? We have a number of initiatives. The Americas Institute clearly is one. McCourt, the Beck Center, we do a lot of data work in the Beck Center as well. How can we collaborate in developing those basic skills that will allow people at the lower end of the pyramid to develop jobs in the online growing economy?
Thank you, Alberto. I think it's an important part of the conversation. We will retake it. There are already some questions about these issues. I'm going to go back to the beginning with Samuel's questions and reflections. I will put Mauricio on the spot and answer some of these or most of the questions that have been addressed, but I would welcome all of you kind of weighing in as we address all of these kind of general problems. So I'll restart with Samuel's question, which is this a good opportunity for multilaterals to promote reforms, especially in issues on governability, transparency, and accountability? And I'd like to add that those are some of our questions from the public also are around government accountability and reform.
100%. So let me first and foremost, let me just say, indeed, and what Alberto said, IDB has the best human capital of any multilateral, has the best teams across the board. And it's been a real pleasure to be able to just come in here and say, I'm not shy, clearly, and say, just take off, innovate, take risks. At the end of the day, the buck stops with me. I have enough, people either love me or hate me anyway. So just do it. And it's been fascinating just watching the energy that people here have had and the things that we've innovated in just 6 months. And I've told you some of the first, and I'm going to tell you some more right now. But going straight to the question you mentioned, look, governance is key. Here's the difference with nearshoring now versus 30 years ago, right? 30 years ago, there was countries and governments in the region of different ideologies, either, more toward the far left or far right, where therefore they were very protectionist. So they didn't even want foreign investment. The one thing that today is an advantage is that regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, every government in the region, with perhaps a few exceptions, but just about every government in the region sees and wants, or at least every member of the IDB, of the 26 borrowing nations of the IDB, sees foreign investment as key. So they want it. So there are really no one purposefully, directly is looking at any protectionist policies. They are trying to bring in foreign investment. So we start from that place. And now for the first time in 30 years, because even though we've talked about the free trade area of the Americas and things since the 90s, for the first time, there's a corporate will, because all of that rhetoric was existing, but yet we were seeing companies were all going towards Asia and China in particular. Now, because of COVID, because of other things, we're seeing that there's the corporate will has united with the political will. So that is a unique in itself, and we have to take advantage of that. Now, there's also lost opportunity. And I always say, it's one thing to think that a chocolate chip cookie is good. It's another thing to see it straight out of the oven and smell it. And when you get that smoke and it smells so good, and then you just almost have to take a bite. If we have that opportunity and they're coming and knocking at the door of these governments, you know, it's incumbent upon them not to screw it up. It's also incumbent upon us to really put governance and accountability and all of these standards at the forefront. And by the way, we start right here at the IDB. One of the things we're doing right here at the IDB now is creating greater safeguards to make sure that we're functioning, that we're an example. And that's one of the priorities that we've set out and that I've set out in this administration, because then the region will mirror that. And if they see those opportunities and they're smelling just how good that chocolate chip cookie is, but they're going to screw it up because of bad practices, then it's an opportunity for all of us to create peer pressure. And for those that have yet to really take transparency as an issue and transparency as a theme, as a cause, and as a priority to do so. So I think that that's a huge priority, but also just the scale of opportunity and going towards, and by the way, whether it's Gartner, UBS, every survey we see 2/3 of US CEOs and global CEOs saying that they're considering, particularly those based in China, that they're considering moving part or all of their supply chains somewhere else out of China. That's a huge opportunity for the region. And therefore, the opportunity is knocking. Now, what's the big challenge to that? Part of the big challenge to that is also, which COVID has also unmasked, is the huge lack of investment in infrastructure that has happened in the region for 20, 30 years. Every time there's been a boom in commodity prices, well, it goes to populist programs. And then everything from airports to ports, roads, et cetera, and nowadays digital infrastructure that's gonna really enhance those investments have been lacking. So now we're playing catch up from frankly irresponsible policies that should have been going towards investments in infrastructure, which have huge impact on GDP across the board. But yet, what is that opportunity today? This is one, I love to say this figure because it's really fascinating. If we simply took, and when we made nearshoring a priority, we asked our integration team, let's look at every comparative advantage the region has, and let's look at where China's exporting. If we simply take 10% of what China is currently exporting to the United States, that the region is also exporting to the United States. So it's not new industries or anything of the sort. You simply just take 10% and move it from one side to another. That's $70 billion in additional exports from Latin America to the United States per year. That, if you take textiles alone, would quadruple exports from the Northern Triangle countries, from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, to the United States. Talk about creating jobs. It's right there. It's right there. And this is not creating something new. This is simply just taking it from one to another. That takes some adjustments. That takes some adjustments here in the United States. That takes some things, but that exists already. So it's really literally for the taking in that regard. So those opportunities exist. It's really about how we do it. And by the way, another problem the region has, which is a good thing, because the political rhetoric has been there. In that political rhetoric of the last 30 years, there's been 30 plus trade agreements in the region. 30 plus trade agreements. But guess what? They're not harmonized. So the trade agreements in itself, all of these trade agreements in the region are an impediment, have become an impediment for a lot of these exports within intra-regionally. 55% of commerce in Asia is intra-regional. 50% more or less of commerce in Europe is intra-regional. 15% of commerce in the region is intra-regional. And part of it is because you have these 30 complex trade agreements that you can't even figure out. If you just harmonize those, that's like a 10, 12, 15% jump in GDP in commerce. And that's like a $20 billion increase in commerce in the region in itself. I mean, so these are just like no-brainers, right? That are coming across the board. Do you want me to continue there, Moni? You shut me up whenever you think
I'd like to stop for 1 second into the issue of integration.
I have more.
We've been hearing about integration for decades, and it hasn't happened. And most of the blocks that have been created have been political blocks, or politically motivated blocks. Is there any hope? Because we see that business is working together, that organizations like the IDB are thinking in terms of multilateral, even the OAS is trying to play a role in recovery on a regional level, but the political spectrum is very wide in Latin America, and that has often been an obstacle. What is your view on what can be done to really take advantage of all those kind of economic synergies and not just have them continue to work on their own?
Yeah, but at least they all agree that foreign investment is good. So let's start there. So we're in a good place. Now, when we launched our nearshoring initiative and we created this partnership, like we've almost created a little bit of a race. So now companies, like they call us first when they're looking to invest in the region or nearshore from one place to another, they'll call us first and say, hey, we're looking at this country, et cetera. Almost to a T, the three countries that they most tell us that every time I get a call from a CEO tell me about a nearshoring opportunity, the three countries that most of that relocation, or at least the ones, and this is obviously this is not scientific. This is literally just based on the phone calls I get, have been Uruguay, Costa Rica, and Colombia. Now, here's where I'm about. If we can at least, now that will is all there, if we have some success stories, and there are countries that are clearly big beneficiaries from this and we can highlight, then other countries are going to come, are going to move in that direction. So we really need to essentially, highlight, those success stories so that other countries do the same thing, because the same will exist in Panama, the same will exist in Chile, the same will exist in a lot of countries that are trying to do and want to do the right thing as well. And there are attractive markets in that regards. But for those that don't, it's really about creating shining examples in that regards. And I think we're starting to see that. We see that a lot. Look, what's the biggest problem right now between Uruguay and Argentina? That all Argentine businesses are moving to Uruguay. You think that Argentina is not catching the drift, that they have to do something different because if not, every Argentine business is going to move to Uruguay? Yeah, absolutely. So I think that peer pressure also creates a lot of impact in that regards. And I think that's important.
We have a lot of questions about what the IDB can do to promote a healthy investment climate. Yes. And how maybe they're all enthusiastic about foreign direct investment, but a lot of times rule of law doesn't follow, the judicial system is faulty, and the kind of the groundwork has not been done. Is there something specific that the bank is doing to try to promote FDI strategies and reforms within countries?
Yeah, so we're working all across the board, and I gave you some examples earlier about countries that we're working with their investment promotion agencies, et cetera. And we're seeing, I just recently presented in Costa Rica, and we saw for every $1 that we put into their investment promotion agency, $41 came back in foreign direct investment. Hey, that's a great investment right there in itself. But look, here's a point that I think we've all said here. The recovery in the region is going to be led by the private sector. So at the end of the day, because there's just no other choice. So at the end of the day, it's how we incentivize and how we mobilize that private sector involvement, the confidence, the financing, et cetera. And we're doing different things across the board. And I'm really glad, so Sam brought up and others have brought up IDB Invest and IDB Lab. Look, before the annual meeting in Barranquilla, I had a really long phone call with Enrique Iglesias, former president of the IDB, who's really a reference point. He's great. And one of the things he was the most excited, he's proudest of the IDB, was the FOMIN, right? So the FOMIN, which is what is today IDB Lab, essentially was, imagine this vision in the 90s. It was about, helping small, medium-sized businesses, and it was kind of focused, on the nuts and bolts in that regards. That was before the tech boom. That was before digitalization. So now we have this phenomenon called IDB Lab, which is our innovation incubator, and we're focused now on these startups, and it's really just taken over in regards to the digital innovation startup world in the region. And then we have IDB Invest, right, which has become, IFC has always lagged in the region, and I have no reason to believe it's not going to lag anymore. So IDB Invest is really the game in town, and by the way, and a great game in that regards, because even during the pandemic, it increased the demand. I was just talking to our managing director, James Scriven, like the demand that we're seeing today from private sector companies looking towards the region is through the roof and off the charts. And one of the things that we did in Barranquilla, which had never happened before in an annual meeting in 61 years of the IDB, is both IDB and Lab and IDB presented to the governors. And one of the things that we're trying to do is in that presentation, how do we break and how do we bridge the continuum? And we just actually approved a project in which I can talk about now because it was approved by the board this week of IDB Invest, a company called Merkeo, right? Which is an online grocer, which is a very innovative online grocer in the region, functioning in Colombia, Mexico, et cetera. And that was originally a project started with IDB Lab, which is now kind of at a Series C phase. and kind of now has moved over to IDB Lab. We've been trying to bridge that continuum because that gives a great opportunity. And by the way, talking about governance, one of the reasons I want a capital increase and I'm pushing so hard for it is so IDB Invest can do more equity investment. You want to talk about how to provide good governance in companies and that are functioning in the region? Give us a seat. Give us a seat on the board. That'll become one of our priorities. We'll lead by example in that regards, but that, guess what? That's capital intensive. So we need more capital in order to be able to do more equity investment in these companies in the region. So all of that's happening. But something else that's also very important, which Manuel had mentioned, was talking about ESG. Hey, today there's a huge opportunity because we also have to be, we don't have all the money in the world, so we have to help raise money, have to do other things. We're innovating. We've done about 16 or 17 social bonds that we've launched throughout the region. We've done it in 7 currencies. IDB Invest just did a gender bond that was launched, the first one in a local market in Mexico. And with those, we're innovating in the way because there's a huge brand of impact investors out there, ESG investors, and they're looking for products where they can put their money. The PIMCOs, the JP Morgans, all of these are looking to the region. And by the way, I think this flight to Florida, to Miami is a great opportunity for the region as well, because now they're being based in Miami. I like to say, once you're in the potaje, you're smelling the potaje, you're going to just take one more step into the region, right? So that's a great opportunity for these impact investors. And let me tell you, the impact that these social bonds have. In Colombia, we did one with Banco W. Banco W, it was a social bond, gender-based bond that helped 25,000 women micro entrepreneurs. These social bonds have huge impact. There's a huge class of investors out there that we're taking advantage of, that we're thinking. And by the way, talking about innovating, best human capital, one of the things that we're doing exciting, hey, look, hedges. We just did a huge energy hedge with Bahamas. First one we had ever done, helped their electricity prices to innovating. Mexico now is doing less of their oil hedges. So guess what? We hired some of their good guys from Banxico, and we're going to start doing hedges in the region. We can do it in other commodities, in Chile, etc. It's incumbent upon us today, because the private sector at the end of the day is going to create room because of the debt to GDP ratios, et cetera, to be innovative, to find ways to help government invest more in infrastructure, to invest more in what's going to attract that investment, but then also to us use our unique tools in what is IDB Lab, and creating that continuum. And we're going to have some exciting announcements coming up in the next couple of months in that regards, and also on the tech front to really take advantage of this opportunity and help be stewards of this with any energy I can possibly muster.
Okay, we have a few questions that I'm going to try to bundle, and you're great at answering everything at once, so I'm just going to throw them at you together. The first is immigration and the migration issue in the Central American region, the U.S.-Mexico border crisis, Venezuela's kind of exodus into not only Colombia but the rest of the continent. What are your views on this? And the second is obviously specific measures to address inequality. And a lot has been said about the reversal, the 10-year reversal of kind of equality efforts in the region. So
yeah. So 2 things. In regards to, I'm not going to give any policy subscriptions on migration. That's not my job. My job is to help my borrowing nation. So at the end of the day, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, obviously Mexico, and those countries that have suffered from this exodus in that regards. And by the way, let's be clear, that exodus is bad for those countries. That those countries are losing human capital. Those are people that can be working, that help increase GDP, that help produce for those countries, and they're leaving. So that is a net loss. It also does something else, which I'm very concerned about. So we saw the IMF just came out with numbers, and it was a little bit rosier than had been with kind of global growth numbers and recovery, and it was over 6%. But yet the region lacked. It was about 2 notches lower, and the reason is because of how the region is heterogeneous in that regards, right? So you had it was divided into 3 parts. The exporting countries are going to have good growth. So Peru, Chile, et cetera, because of the commodities, et cetera. And now, of course, what we hope is the lesson is that those commodities will be invested on infrastructure and on these good policies as opposed to populist programs. And hopefully that won't happen. And hopefully that lesson will be learned. So those are going to have, quicker, faster growth. Then you have in the middle, you have those countries that at the end of the day are going to benefit, say Mexico, to a degree some of the Central Americans, from the United States and the stimulus that we're seeing here in the United States, whether it's the COVID stimulus, maybe now infrastructure, et cetera. And my big concern there, which is what goes to this point, is that those countries then don't become remittance dependent. because remittance dependency may get them by, may have their economies grow, but that's a short-term fix. And that dependency on remittance will hurt the countries in the mid to long term, because then it also, by the way, it prevents a lot of the governance changes that we want. It prevents a lot of good policies that are going to stimulate foreign direct investment, because at the end of the day, governments then become lazy and they just focus and look at remittances to sustain their growth. And then the third, which are the lowest and need the most help, frankly, are those in the Caribbean and others that are completely tourist dependent or mostly tourist dependent. And then obviously the pandemic couldn't have been worse for them in that regards. And we want to, obviously make sure that we're helping them. So that's and obviously I want to. By the way, this is a democratic event. I want to hear from others, not just.
No, I've been trying.
I'm here to learn also. I'm just.
There are many questions. Just I've been kind of trying to consolidate them into big subjects. I would like to give the opportunity to our panelists. If you want to raise your hand, if you want to ask some more questions or add to the conversation. We still have 7 minutes, and I'm very impressed with the use of time of all these Latin Americans around this Zoom, and then we've been very, very good with the time management. So Manuel, Alberto, Samuel, if you want to add something, please, Manuel. You have.
Yeah, I think that Mauricio mentioned something which I think it was mentioned by many of them, which is this 40 million jobs lost in the region. And that's, I think, counting only the formal sector, because there is all the informal jobs lost that is hard to count. Clearly the biggest equalizer in terms of job creation is the small and medium-sized companies, and they are the big potential growth. Technology can help on that. We have seen examples like Startup Israel, where Israel became a major player in the innovation, technology, etc. We are seeing Francis Suarez, now the mayor of Miami, trying to position that. How can the IDB help these countries to direct into this direction? These countries in Latin America have to have very comprehensive, and they need, I think, the multilateral. Money, there is money out there. There is plenty of money out there. We are investors, many other investors we see. The issue is we need direction. We need, when you talk about nearshoring, I think what you need is stability, infrastructure, rule of law, so the companies decide to go to our countries and not to go to Taiwan or to go to Singapore or somewhere else. And those are the main issues that you face when you talk to those. So I think that's, and this is a question or it's a comment, but it's a question to Mauricio, and how can the IDB lead that effort, which has to do with private sector, has to do with public sector, has to do with rule of the game, and how to provide those examples so these countries really can succeed on these areas.
Can I answer, Moni, or?
Yes, you may.
Look, that's a great question. And by the way, focused on part of your question in regards to what we're seeing from the money relocation here in Miami and on the tech side, we have some really, stay tuned, because we have some really exciting things that we're going to launch in the next couple of months that go right to the heart of that and how we can use that opportunity to scale in the region. But your macro question, let me just say, look, the reason I was elected, I was elected for 23 out of 28 countries in the Western Hemisphere, and I'm obviously the first American president, although obviously of Latin descent. The reason I was elected was because the countries in the region want to see greater U.S. commitment from U.S. companies, from the U.S. Congress, and others for the first time in a very long time, not only in the IDB, but also to the region. And if I can help move that, whether because you love me or you hate me, then that's a good thing. And I think we're doing that already with a private sector partnership. This was 40 companies, and I told you all those. And since then, I've had 10 others, McKinsey, Accenture, Boeing, Honeywell, Aegon, you name it, that have said, hey, we want to be a part of this private sector partnership, because they know, we're creating that confidence. We're getting them on board. We're moving that, so we're trying to use the IDB as a guide for them towards the region, some like that they can knock on our door and we're going to help them find those opportunities. I've had chief investment officers of big insurance companies, I'll call us and say, hey, look, we're looking to move $1 billion from Europe to Latin America and the Caribbean. Yeah, sure, some of them are chasing yields, but they're saying, hey, where do you see the opportunities? That's what we want to do. We're creating that. Call us up. We'll tell you where there's some good opportunities and we'll connect you, et cetera. But then obviously on the flip side, the governments that are going to benefit the most are those that create the best environment for that. And whether it's governance across the board, whether it's policies, et cetera, but they want that. That's why they elected me. That's why they elected for the first time in America, because that's what they want to see. They want more U.S. companies and more investors. They want to see that. And they want to see the U.S. Congress support for the first time in 30 years, a true capital increase for the IDB. And we're seeing for the first time in 30 years, bipartisan legislation to do so. And we're going to keep pushing on that front as well. So I think we have a unique opportunity here. And I'll tell you, it's not going to be for any lack of effort on our part to really get this going.
I'd like to give Alberto an opportunity to weigh in.
Sorry, Ricardo was raising his hand. Ricardo, you want to go? Because
I just want to make a brief comment. Mauricio, I think that all the things we're saying are only looking from the perspective of Latin America. What we need to say as well is that there is a win-win for the US as well. Huge. I mean, the better the region does, the better it'll be for the US. The US is an immigration problem, but let's not get into that side of the issue right now. But we have numbers that demonstrate that if you were to increase in the nearshoring, the participation of the Triángulo Norte into what they're doing, something you said that I was very, very much in tune with you, if something that is already exists, if we just increase the numbers by increasing the market share from the textile industry from 5% to 10%, then the cut in the immigration problem to the US will be reduction in close to 500,000 people. So we need to think of it not as a win only for the region, but also a win for the US. So the hemisphere will benefit because it's helping everybody.
I'm sorry, Mooney, can I real quick? So look, in 2010, the United States did not participate fully. They earmarked all the money to one country, to Haiti, and obviously there's good reasons, but left the others out. Did not participate in a capital increase for the bank. When IDB Invest went through their capitalization in 2015, the United States did not participate. Guess who filled that gap over the last 10 years? Guess who became a member of the bank in 2010? China. If the United States doesn't fill that gap, someone else will. In that regard. And I hope that we, as the United States, and I work for 26 borrowing nations now, I work with 48 shareholders, 26 borrowing nations now, so I work for all of them. I hope the United States now realizes that mistake in 2010 and 2015, and we don't make that mistake again, because there's a unique opportunity. The region wants the IDB and the United States to be its preferred partner, and there's an opportunity there. The question whether it's taken or not, we'll see. And I was going to talk one more thing on another point in regards to private sector. Look, some really exciting things that I just remembered, and I recalled, Moon, as I was listening. I didn't answer your gender question fully, but one of the exciting things we're doing with the private sector in regards to gender is really working specifically on projects that are helping women entrepreneurs. So we just launched also in Barranquilla, Creciendo Juntas, right? Which we partnered up with MasterCard in helping small, medium-sized entrepreneurs, women, in regards, and there we help them with their fintech. We help them, in their payment system so that they can become more efficient, more successful. Something really fun that we did with PepsiCo, and I love this because it goes to integration, and we want to do a lot more of it. I've talked to InBev about it now as well. Is with PepsiCo, which, as you know, owned Frito-Lay as well. They were helping in Guatemala, Dominican Republic, and Ecuador. So women farmers, so potato farmers, we're creating that supply chain. So we help them through the IDB, we help them, women farmers and potato, et cetera, and the end purchaser is already set forth, which is Frito-Lay. If we can do that with a lot more companies, that's also going to help that system. So we're innovating, doing different exciting things all the times with the private sector at the end of the day, which goes to all of this. But obviously there's a lot more that needs to be done, and we're really focused on gender in that regards. Sorry, I begged you.
Thank you. And before we say goodbye, I do want to give Alberto the opportunity to have his say, and then we will move on to Ricardo's closing.
Actually, I'm very mindful of the time constraints. Do you want to wrap it up? Don't worry, Mooney. If you want to wrap it up now, it's noon already. So
thank you.
It's up to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mauricio, for being incredibly receptive to all of these questions. We still have some more questions from the audience. We could be here all morning, but I'm going to just kick it off to Ricardo so that he can.
All right. So, well, I just want to thank you to Mauricio. Mauricio, you have what I would call contagious energy. Is really exciting to see the level of energy that goes not only for understanding what the region, how the region is, but also with the chocolate chip cookies. So it was really, really interesting to see how contagious your whole energy is being transferred through the webinar. So thank you so very much. I also want to thank the board members. I want to thank you, Mooney. You've done an outstanding job as usual. There is a long way ahead, but institutions like the IDB are here to support the region and to help to reach its potential, to help the region with the private sector collaboration. From the perspective of the Georgetown University, the Latin American Leadership Program, the Center of Latin American Studies, the Beck Center, the Georgetown University Americas Institute, which will launch in the coming months officially, and are all committed to build on our academic strength, to engage faculty, students, leaders from the public and private sectors around the critical economic, political, and social challenges facing Latin America and the hemisphere as a whole. We all need to work together for this. And as I always like to say, if not us, who? If not now, when? So thank you so much to all of you. It was great. And we are all very energized. Thank you so much for joining, and stay tuned.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mauricio. Thank you, Muni.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.